The Guardians are ramping up for the regular season, and a lot of the local ball players in your family are ramping up, whether it be Little League, let it be travel ball, high school ball. They're getting ready. And there's some right ways and wrong ways to ramp up. And I want to go down that road this morning. My good friend, Dr. Joe Congini, Sports Medicine Center, Akron Children's Hospital, on board with us. And Joe, talking a lot of baseball this week. And when we talk baseball, beginning of the spring, we talk about the arm, the strength, working it out and doing it the right way.
Yeah, that's right, Ray. I believe I checked my calendar, and it says March now. So people are, as we move into March, you've got Guardians Week going, but also, of course, our younger baseball players, our high school players, our club players have all turned up and ramped up the intensity. And I was looking for a couple of pointers from somebody, the most knowledgeable person I know in the greater Akron area in baseball. And I called my good friend, Dan DeVoe. Dan is a local legend. He's regional expert. I first ran into Dan many years ago. He was the athletic trainer for the Canton Akron Indians down at Thurman Munson Stadium. He then had several stints with a lot of other minor league teams, several other minor league teams, including, and then also with the Colorado Rockies. But he had a call to come home, and we got him to come back into town, and he became our head athletic trainer at Hudson High School for about 18 years. And so, although he was a legendary trainer and everybody loved him, everybody also knew that baseball was his main love. And he not only did athletic training for baseball, but he also has done and continues to do a lot of coaching in baseball, too. So I thought, I could get some pointers from him as we move into March. One thing with Dan is that he's battled some serious medical issues lately, but in his typical way, I think he's getting ahead of those and doing well with some of the medical battles he has. Although he has a couple issues this week, so we have him in our thoughts and prayers. But I got the opportunity to touch base with Dan and get a couple of his ideas today. And some of the things that he talked about, a few pointers. Number one, he thought that in March, this is the time that he talked to a lot of his athletes, and still does as he coaches baseball now, is really to cut back on some of the heavier lifting, especially the overhead weights. He thought it was time in March to start cutting back on those. But also, really, number two is continuing and maybe even ramping up on shoulder flexibility. Shoulder flexibility at this time of year, very, very important, and increasing the shoulder flexibility. And thirdly, he is a big proponent of long toss. And in most winters, we're inside and it's really hard in the gyms and things to do a lot of long toss. But once we move outside in March, he is a big proponent of doing a lot of long toss. We've had a really unusual year this year. So many kids are coming in our office, and they are practicing spring sports and baseball particularly in February. We had a lot of outdoor practices in February. I'm interested and anxious to see how that affects our athletes. But long toss is something that Dan feels really strongly about. And the other thing he said that gets by a lot of our baseball players is in the winter, they're doing shorter practices, half-hour practices. They're in a batting cage, which isn't, a continuous activity. And then they move outside and they get more serious about their workouts, and they may have 2 or 3 hour workout sessions. And he said that for a lot of his athletes, they just don't pay attention to the importance of nutrition. And he really recommends that they pack higher energy snacks and things like that, so that in between practice, especially the first couple of weeks when they're transitioning from shorter practices to longer practices, to make sure that you from a nutrition standpoint, are taking care of the high energy foods. And number two, and high energy snacks. And number two, he said, still a problem after all these years is hydration. And he would see it at all levels, at the high school level, the youth level where he coaches, and even when he was up with the minor league teams that he worked with, is hydration is a big issue, and making sure that these kids are aware of and paying attention to hydration. And those were 4 of the major bullet point messages that this legend in baseball, Dan DeVoe, had for us today.
You know, Joe, when we talk about ramping up and getting ready and doing it the smart way, I imagine you would come back to one word being patience, right? Sometimes we like to push because the weather breaks. We're all excited, but we have to be patient in regards to ramping up, whether it's the arm, the legs, whatever it might be, preparing for an upcoming season.
No question, Ray. You know that from being through this as an athlete yourself and with your kids. It has to be an incremental thing. You have to ramp up gradually, and you have to have a good plan about how you're doing that. Are you doing a 25% to 50% to 75%? Some sort of progression, functional progression, we call it in sports medicine, is doing it in a way that we have functional progression. And the good news this year, really good news, is that it looks like kids got an early start on it. You know, some years we go directly into winters, harsh winters, right into trying to play some baseball. But it looks like we have plenty of time for that functional progression this year, Ray, and you are right on target. But that's what our teams and coaches and athletes should be thinking about. So just like the Guardians out there in the desert, our athletes here should be looking at a few of those things to make sure that they're ramping up gradually and going through a good functional progression program so that by the time we get to the end of March and especially April and especially May, when we get a lot more serious and we're into the games and things, that these athletes are not getting on the disabled list, the injury list. That's what we're trying to do, is keep them off the injury list. And nobody better in our area, and our thoughts and prayers are with Dan DeVoe this week, than Dan DeVoe, a local legend who took care of a lot of minor league and some major league athletes himself, and then with a lot of high school athletes. And so that is a very reasonable way to progress yourself. Is what's called functional progression.
All right, Joe. Great stuff. Nothing we want, especially these young athletes. They get so excited for their seasons to push it too forward. And as Joe mentioned, to get hurt when sometimes the ball season is only 6 weeks, 8 weeks long. And if for them to go on the DL for about a month or so can really hurt them mentally and physically. So do it the right way. Joe, as always, my friend, thank you for making time for us on Wednesdays. We'll do it again next week.